Hey, my name's Allie Howe. I am the host of the Insecure Agents podcast, and today we're coming to you from RSA. I've got Alex Stamos here with me today. He's the Chief Product Officer at Corridor and has a very notable long security career, was Chief Security Officer at Facebook. Super excited to chat with Alex today about how AI is eating security. Alex, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Alex Stamos. I've been doing security for a long time, for basically the age of all of my coworkers. I started with a Commodore 64 as a teenager, doing not so legal things. Got to go to Berkeley, work on actually software security and system security there. And then worked for a couple of companies, started RSAC Partners back then, which was one of the first application security consultancies. And then since then, I've been a CISO. I was a CISO at Yahoo, Facebook, and most recently SentinelOne. In the middle there, I took a break and I taught full-time at Stanford and did a bunch of research work, which is how I actually met the founders of our company. So they both worked on my research team, and I was one of their first checks and super excited what they're doing. So I got to join them last summer. And so now I'm Chief Product Officer of Corridor and still teach at Stanford, just don't get paid for it anymore.
Amazing. Yeah, super cool. What's Corridor do?
Corridor is we're trying to make AI coding safe for enterprises and companies that really care about security. So we will build guardrails based upon your code base that are both prevent security flaws, but then also help coding agents build code that is specific to your security needs. One of the things we find is LLMs are actually better than humans at writing secure code for the most part, but they're really optimized for the 49 square miles of San Francisco, right? Yes. Where if you're using Claude Code, you're starting with like Node 24 TypeScript on a blank sheet of paper. And that's not how the real world is. Like in the real world, you've got people at Midwest hospital chains that have a million lines of old C# ASP.NET or of J2E, and you apply a cursor of Claude Code to that, and while it speaks the language really well, what's problematic is it will have trouble understanding the security context for the 20 years of development that came before. So we index code bases, we build security guardrails, and then we plug in directly to Claude Code, Cursor, Codex, Factory, all the major coding agents, and we give it advice in real time. So as it's building things, we tell it, this is how you can build things more securely, and then we scan the code that's being created to make sure there's no vulnerabilities before it even gets committed.
Amazing. Yeah, so I met you a couple of weeks ago at Reddit's NewsSec event where you gave a talk called AI is Eating Security. Super interesting conversation there that I want to expand on here today. But I think you also just mentioned another point that AI is not only eating security, but it's eating software. Coding agents are people are now targeting software factories where AI agents are now writing all of their code, reviewing it, and eventually maybe the human will be completely out of the loop. I don't know what a world looks like that in terms of the security also. How do we secure code specifically?
I mean, we're just surfing this wave. If anybody tells you they know what the world's going to be like in 2 years, they're just lying, or they're fooling themselves, or they're trying to sell you something, or probably all three, which you see a lot of people at RSA who are very confident about their predictions. And I'm not. We just finished a product planning cycle, and we're planning 60 days out, because in 60 days, there's going to be something else revolutionary happening. We have obviously a vision beyond 60 days, but you have to stay flexible if you want. And you talk about software factories. This is a word people started using 6 months ago, right? And we have a number of customers who are now at the place where each engineer is supervising 5 or 6 different agents. Those agents might be pulling bugs directly off of Linear or Jira, working on them autonomously, generating the PR, and then human beings are doing the final merge, but in some cases without changing a single byte. And how do you do any kind of security in that model? Is crazy. So it's one thing, again, if you're a little startup here in San Francisco, which is a lot of these folks are, even if you're a successful one, you're a private company, you don't have a CISO has to sign a Sarbanes-Oxley letter. You don't have to get a SOC 2 Type 2. You don't have to live up to ISO 27001. But the rest of the world has rules, and public companies has rules, and you have this crazy situation where CISOs are being held responsible. They're being told, put AI into every part of our enterprise, including AI coding. By the way, we don't relieve you of any of your obligations, right? And that's an extremely difficult place to be.
Oh, 100% for sure. Yeah, it's a very difficult place to be a developer right now that's trying to ship fast but also securely. How is AI changing the way kill chains work? Because bugs are so much easier now to find, that the models are getting so much better. So how is that changing? Yeah, so we really are facing, over the next at least 2 years, a kind of bug apocalypse in all of the existing code. Our lives here in San Francisco, right? What we're doing today, if you think about it, there are probably over 1 billion lines of open source that our lives depend upon, right?
the Linux kernel, everything in the GNU Linux stack, all the different services. That is what's keeping the power on. That's what allowing these buses to move behind us in this very dynamic background that we have for this podcast. That's, all of these systems, a lot of them are running on 20-year-old, 30-year-old code in some cases. That's also certainly true for the commercial vendors, right? The Microsofts, the Apples, parts of what Google has done, like the people who aren't building everything on open source and are shipping. And for all of that, vulnerability discovery is becoming much, much, much easier. So what we've seen the last couple of months, and this is something that we've been warned about, right? So Heather Atkins, a friend of mine at Google, has been warning about this for since, I think most of last year. Dave Aitel at OpenAI, and now Nick Carlini at Anthropic gave a really good talk that I recommend for any of your listeners who are in security at the Unprompted conference, which they just released the video. So you can find, I think this morning, so you can find his video. But he talked about how Opus has now reached super intelligence in a specific circumstance, and that it's better than him at finding bugs, which if you know anything about him is a terrifying statement, right? And so what's happened over the last couple of months is because Opus 4.6, because GPT 5.2, the latest foundation models have hit a click above people, right? So we're now one step above the best bug finders. And as a result, higher swaths of issues in code that has been looked at by hundreds of people is now we're finding all these bugs in. Carlini's example was a bug that Anthropic found in the Linux kernel that's 23 years old, right? So don't tell me what you were doing 23 years ago. I was professional. You were having fun in first grade or something.
Yeah, it's probably like eating ice cream and being a kid. Yeah.
Great. So yes. So you have no blame for this, but I do, in that, our industry, we've been, for these last couple of decades, we've been writing code still in memory and type unsafe languages in C and C++. We have been using a kind of formal verification. We've just thought we'll find the bugs and fix them. And so what we're finding now is LLMs that are one step above humans, and there's a whole swath of bugs that they're finding. And that comes from the Foundation Lab company. So Anthropic apparently has thousands and thousands of bugs that they have yet verify and send to open source. OpenAI's got the same, Google's got the same. All of them are trying to grind and find these bugs, but it's very hard for open source developers to fix them fast enough, right? So they actually have to, if you're one of these companies, you have to ship the patches as well as the bugs itself. But you see this also, if you read on X or Blue Sky or Reddit, security engineers and researchers are now, just with Claude Code and a couple of skills, are as good as the best vulnerability finders were 2-3 years ago.
That's terrifying.
It's terrifying. Yeah. And so this is going to be a big deal. And I think people are actually underestimating how big of a deal it's going to be outside of the handful of people who really work on this. Because the uncomfortable truth is that, I've done a lot of incident response in my career. I've done a lot of work responding to attacks from really high-end state actors, right? So the Ministry of State Security of the People's Republic of China, the SVR and the FSB and the GRU of Russia. That's the main Russian intelligence agencies. The IRGC, the Iran, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, they run most of Iran's hacking. The Lazarus Group from North Korea. The truth is that the vast majority of companies and organizations in the world have never had to deal with a true zero-day threat. They've never actually faced an adversary who had a undiscovered flaw with brand new exploit code that's never been seen before that can't be patched. Maybe out of the Fortune 500, you got 50, 60, 70 companies like that. Oil and gas, big banks, big tech companies, utility, a couple other people in the defense industrial base. These are the companies where the Ministry of State Security might do a huge amount of research, find a brand new flaw, an exploit, write brand new malware, and then use it against you. Outside of those organizations, people have not had to face this threat. And now we are moving to a situation where the first couple steps of the kill chain, right? So the kill chain is a term we use that we stole from the military in cyber to talk about the things an attacker has to do to break in and to be successful in a breach. The first couple steps are usually finding flaws and then weaponizing those flaws. Those are getting exponentially easier because of AI for attackers. So the first step, we're already at the place for the first step of the finding the bugs. The next step is you take that bug and you write working shellcode, you write working malware, you write brand new exploits that have never been seen before. That is still quite hard, but AI is making it a lot easier. One of the reasons it is hard for people is that the Foundation Lab, the cutting edge models will not do that work for you, right? So they will find bugs in software. They have to, OpenAI and Anthropic and Google have to allow that capability so that defenders can find the bugs, but they don't have to let you build weapons with it, right? Yeah. So you cannot ask Claude Code, build me shell code. But we have these open weight models, the Qwens, the DeepSeeks. They are really 6-8 months behind here. And so if we get to the point where the open weight models are as good at both finding and then writing exploit code, and you can go on Hugging Face right now, and you can find versions of Qwen 3.5 that have been jailbroken and that have been retrained on all the shellcode that's ever been seen. It is not perfect, but if in 6, 8, 9 months it's good enough, then we're going to be seeing this huge wave of adversary groups who are not the top tier state actors, who are both lower level governments, but also financially motivated actors. And some more guys who have used to always have to use off the shelf exploits or used misconfigurations or used stealing credentials are now going to have the kind of cyber weapons that only the US and Israel and Russia and China and a couple other countries of that category used to have 5 years ago. That is not good.
No, that's
we're
terrifying.
not ready as an industry to protect against that.
Yeah, that's wild. It's wild to me that like so many companies that have never faced a 0-day or never had to worry about this threat now do, and they've got maybe they go through their incident response like exercise once a year as part of like a compliance exercise. And they're going to be super underprepared to be able to deal with this. How does the average company like go about dealing with this? Like, what's like the first couple things they should do?
Writing their own software. So the first thing is don't make new bugs. And this is one of the good things about the AI era is that LLMs are reasonably good at writing secret code. At Corridor, we build a product to make it better at writing secret code, but like they're still usually better than your average human developer. And so the first thing is for the stuff that you build yourself, don't create new vulns, because those will be much easier for people to find and attack, even black box, even if they don't have your source code. There's a lot of people automating we already have a bunch of commercial providers, but the capability for that to be done by adversaries is just a little bit behind of them automatically finding vulnerabilities and exploiting them. So this is especially web apps, line of business apps where are specific to companies that they're building in-house. So first, don't make it worse, right? Bend the curve, and that's totally doable. The second thing is, we talk about the kill chain. Those first steps, the discovery of vulnerabilities, and then eventually writing the exploits and then writing the rest of the malware, those are going exponential for attackers. The rest of the kill chain, a bunch of those steps do get better with AI, but just like geometric, right? And so what you're going to have to do, and this has always been true for if you're one of those 50 companies, like I was the CISO at Facebook, and we actually faced that. Like we had ODA used against us by APT-17, which is a Chinese group. We had a number of fascinating issues with big governments who were attacking us. And so we had to build lines of defense that assumed that our front-end systems were able to be compromised, right? That is a very different way of doing security, because the truth is most companies believe that vulnerability management is going to work for them. They believe that if I patch really fast, if I fix things, then as long as that system is totally configured correctly, totally patched, it's probably impenetrable. And we're going to have to invert that to assume that every system you have can be penetrated by an attacker, and that what you have to pick up is the signs of that penetration, the signs of their exploration, and you have to react really quickly. Because while humans are still going to be in the loop for some attackers, and some others, especially the financially motivated one, they're just going to completely automate, because they're in the business of having 10,000 potential victims. And right now a ransomware group might only ransom 10 of them, right? Because like you have to exploit them, you have to do east-west movement, you have to get on a bunch of machines. That takes a bunch of human skills to go do. If you can automate all those steps in the ransomware playbook, then you might go from 10,000 victims to 1,000 victims. That's 100 times more money. That includes the negotiation. This is also a fascinating thing, is that you now find people doing ransomware negotiations with bots, because it used to be ransomware groups would have to find somebody with enough English skills to do a high stakes negotiation for hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. And now you just have a bot do that for you. And so anyway, I think as a defender, you have to have great visibility in your network. You have to have all of your logs in one place. You have to be looking for signs of exploitation that are not tied to specific bugs or specific exploits. And there's a variety of ways you do that, with EDR and a variety of other products. And then you have to have automated response. If you have to wake up a person at 3 a.m. and they have to open their laptop and log in and go through and like figure out, oh God, what's going on? Okay, yes, I approve my AI agent doing something radical, like turning off an account or shutting down a container. That's too late, right? Yeah. Because if that malware is being driven by AI, it's only going to need a couple of minutes to do that kind of internal exploration to pick out an exploit to make the next jump. And you're already behind the ball. You're chasing them. And so the automated response is actually a really interesting, but it's also a difficult thing as a CISO or CIO to feel at all comfortable with.
Yes, no, really excited to dive into the autonomous response and how we enable that to be able to defend against this. But also super interested to touch on, you mentioned that any new software that we write needs to be secure. And we can use AI to make sure that it's more secure. So like using tools like Corridor or something else to make sure that anything new we write is bug-free. And I feel like more companies are going to be leaning to that route, because I'm talking to other people that are developers, and they were saying, I don't know that I'm going to use open source packages. If I could just write this quickly with an LLM, maybe I'll just use less open source over time. Is that a strategy also? Maybe, open source won't be as used as much anymore, so we should just write new code that can be scanned by AI?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there's certain open source components that we're just going to have to live with. Like, people aren't going to write their own kernels.
Yes.
They're not going to write their own TLS stacks. They're not going to write, like, replace Nginx. They're not going to. So there's still base stuff. Now, fortunately, the really important parts of open source generally have lots of maintainers. And to the extent that there's any collective action happening, which is not fast enough, but to the extent that there's any collective action happening, it's on those components, right? People are scanning OpenSSH, they're scanning OpenSSL, they're scanning Nginx, they're scanning the Linux kernel. And I think this becomes a really interesting question for this huge explosion of everything basically in NPM, right? Of all the stuff you use, the open source you use if you're building a web app, which is the standard thing has become, I bring in all these different components. I have this humongous dependency tree. And that is becoming a huge security issue for a couple of reasons. One, because you can have the flaws in it and they don't get fixed. And if somebody finds a flaw in one of those, they can hit thousands and thousands of victims. The other thing we keep on seeing is these supply chain attacks through package managers like NPM, where one person's account gets taken over and that package gets updated and that package has an auto run script in it. And then everybody who updates, their accounts get taken over, and that you have these like massive worms. We just had a big emergency last night along these lines with Light LLM, which kept a lot of us. It's always fun when these things happen during a security conference.
Yes.
Because you're at dinner and like everybody's phone is exploding. It's like everybody is talking back to the less lucky people who are not allowed to come to that dinner to tell them what to do, and then they go back. Yeah, exactly. So open source, those kind of libraries are going to pose some interesting issues, and I think you're right. Like, people are going to possibly rebuild it. Of course, like if you ask Cloud Code to rebuild that, or if you ask Cursor to rebuild it, what are they building it on? It's probably on the trained open source. Like,
yes.
If you ask it to exactly replace some kind of existing library one-to-one, the odds of it having a bunch of code from that library is actually quite high, right? Based upon like how these things are trained on all of GitHub, for example. But yeah, I do think both the dependency issue and people, the fact that some of these things are not going to get fixed, they're not going to be maintained is going to be a big deal.
Yeah, makes sense. And I was at the Daytona's compute conference recently, their sandbox conference, and I got to have this conversation. Basically, one thing I learned was like sandboxes are not created equal in terms of the partitioning between how much of the VM or virtual machine like do you actually like get to sit on, like do you own the whole thing? Because if there's these vulnerabilities in Linux from like 2003 and you are sitting on that box with somebody else and they get compromised, then they can expand into you and compromise you.
Yeah.
So you need to be choosy about how you're running your AI code these days too.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the interesting kind of like finding vulnerabilities in hypervisors are the kind of thing that literally only a couple dozen people were doing 10 years ago. And it was big. Like when cloud first got big, again, now you're probably in junior high or something. When cloud first got big, there was all this discussion about the multi-tenant security. And there were a bunch of bugs found, right? But the really important open source hypervisors like KVM and stuff got better. The hardware support got better. And we've all gotten kind of like used to the idea that we're fine. Now, one, like you said, sandboxes are not all the same in that a lot of them poke holes intentionally for functionality. And so a lot of people are running quote unquote sandbox code that is not sandboxed at all. But the second is, I think that's exactly the kind of research, reverse engineering ring 0, ring -1, like low level assembly code in a hypervisor that is interacting with the very complex virtualized memory management, the mechanisms that allow you to share PCI Express devices across virtual machines. These are things that like one have a bunch of errata in them from Intel and AMD, but that's the kind of research that you would not see from anybody but the top public researchers and the top nation states, right? Like I am sure US Cyber Command has some great hypervisor breaks. I'm sure the Ministry of State Security has great hypervisor breaks, but until recently, I don't think, say, India and Pakistan did, right? And from a geopolitical perspective, this is also one of the interesting things that's going to happen, is that we're very obviously US centric and we talk about breaches that involve the US, but there's all kinds of pairings of countries around the world with, long conflicts that now play out in cyber. And so like India and Pakistan, Iran and Saudi Arabia. And these are the kinds of places where now their state actors have a whole nother suite of capabilities that used to be reserved for the big guys, for the Chinas and the Russias and the US and the Israels. And so the fact that all those people are now going to be finding these things is also interesting because those will both be used in attacks, but then also be found in the wild. And then, so like we're right at the start of that, but I expect as of right now, because governments have money and they can pay for the cutting edge models and they can pay for their own AI training internally, that you're already probably seeing a significant upgrading capability by what used to be the second and third tier state actors.
Interesting. Yeah. So what I've gotten out of this so far is like we should definitely be scanning all of the new code we're creating, making sure that we are also maybe scanning any code we've been using before, knowing what we're vulnerable to. But also assuming breach.
Yeah.
So how do we make sure our agents have the hard boundaries in place to make sure that they're not going to do the wrong things in the event that they're compromised or their systems
And
compromised.
if they're compromised, you respond. Challenges here. To try to respond at that speed, you have to have AI agents doing it for you. And that is a very scary thing as a CISO. You should not have an AI agent where you're just like, oh, here's my, admin account to Google Workspace, and here's an IAM account that can do everything on my production AWS, right? What you want to do is you want to build a, SIMSOAR agentic system that has deterministic levers that they pull, right? Here are the 10, 12, 15 things that I tell you my agent you're allowed to do. And then you want to train them on runbooks that have those levers. Now, the good thing for most large companies is if you have a SOC, you've already done that, because those are the same levers you give to your tier one SOC people. You don't take a tier one SOC hire and then say like, here's, global admin on my tenant, or here's full control of my AWS instance. You create specific security responses that they're allowed to pull those levers. And so you start with providing those levers to the AI systems. But where we're going to end up is much more in like a open cloud kind of model where these agents have the ability to write code on demand and to create new capabilities on demand. And I think that's going to be necessary because you're going to have attackers being innovative, and you're going to have an AI agent that's doing defense say, I see this attacker moving from machine to machine. You have not given me the proper lever. I will now, within some kind of boundaries, create a new lever. And so figuring out that is both a security issue, but it's also a significant alignment problem of how do you align these AI agents to do security response in a way that would be innately knowable to a human responder. A human responder knows, don't create more damage. I'm not going to shut down the entire company. Yeah. I'm not going to leak data. I'm not going to make things worse. I'm going to try to only make things better. And they also know when to ask their boss, right? But an agent doesn't know those things unless you train it in that. And I think we're going to have both, really great stories of AI agents saving people, and we're going to have some crazy stories of them completely blowing companies away. And that's the other thing, like both from the bug apocalypse and from AI response, is resilience is going to be a huge deal, is the ability to recover and to survive both attacks and the possibility of your response bots going nuts.
And that makes sense. We need AI agent defenders to help us out, and especially like respond at speed. Your humans are not awake at 3 a.m., but your agent can be and ready to go.
I mean, we're going to be, in a couple of years, it's going to be normal for human defenders are supervising AI agents that are doing defense, and the attackers are supervising AI agents that are doing offense, right? The humans will just be the executives saying, no, try this, try that. These are the kinds of targets I want on the attacker side. On the defender side, we'll be saying, this is what I want you to do from a defense side. These are the tools I'm giving you. These are the parameters you can operate in. Here's some new intelligence that we were able to get. But all the work's going to be being done by the bots, and we'll just be their bosses.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. But I wonder like how many companies are doing that today, or how far away we are from that. Because what I'm seeing is that a lot of agents are stuck in POC mode where they're connected to one thing. Maybe it's their Google Workspace account, but maybe it's not the real Google Workspace account. It's like we don't actually trust our agent to be connected to the things that matter. But they have to be, like you were saying, to be able to do meaningful work, to be able to respond at speed. They need to be able to maybe rotate credentials or be connected to high-risk systems, have all of that context so they can actually take meaningful action. But that's super scary from like an authentication perspective to have that power. So how do we give our agents the autonomy and the capability to actually do that meaningful work, but still have security in place so they don't do the wrong thing, they don't create more damage, like you were saying?
I mean, there's no perfect way to do it, right? So if you're a vendor who's building these tools, so my recommendation is, one, I think modern security or any enterprise software has to be modular. People do not want to be product managed too much anymore. What they want is they want your product to do what it does really well. And then don't spend all your time on like, this is exactly how the flow has to go. This is exactly what our dashboard looks like, all that stuff, because they can vibe code all that, right? What they want is like, what is the core thing you are good at? And then the second is, if you do anything agentic, you have to design your system to be able to build trust. Right. So where I could slowly turn this up, where I can test it, where I can simulate, where I can say, hey, how would you act in this circumstance? And so like last year I was at Sentinel-1, we automated our entire SOC. And one of the good things about, security operations being something you automate is that at any reasonably sized company, you will have thousands of examples of tickets that have been handled by humans that you can use as your training set. And so that both allowed us to teach agents what we want them to do, but then also test them, because we were able to replay real incidents and say, how would it have acted? And then when it does something wrong, we're like, no, that's not how you handle this, right? Yeah. When this happens, you shut down an account. You do not shut down the data center, right? Like things like that. And so that's part of, if you're doing it yourself, it's a bunch of work. If a company's doing it, they need to fundamentally think about how people are going to build trust, and to have a mechanism that allows you to slowly turn up and to simulate and to, to do these things so that you can get to a place where you trust turning over that power. Because right now there's a bunch of companies here at RSA where it's like, oh, just give me full control of all your stuff on day one. No problem. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
And that's just not going to happen.
That makes sense. Yeah, we need to creep up that autonomy curve like iteratively. We're not just going to jump from static POC to a Waymo and overnight. So that makes sense.
Yeah, and you just got, I mean, again, it's the pressure, you have this cross pressure on CIOs and CISOs of boards are telling public companies, CIOs and CISOs, we want to get rid of 20% of our employees. We're going to use AI to do it, right? And so I want you to do everything possible to enable people to have AI. By the way, we want zero breaches and zero violations of trust. We never want an intellectual property leak, but just make that all happen. Right. And so, it is a tough time to be like a public company, CIO, CISO. It is very hard for them to say no to like all these crappy AI enabled products that are out there. It's hard for them to say no to giving a huge amount of autonomy to their employees. On the flip side, they still have to sign the same letters. They still have the same compliance requirements. Nothing has been loosened. And none of the standards take into account the fact that you're doing these things with AI. So if you want to help those folks, then you need to help by, one, we need to build capabilities for people to have safe, fun experiences. So all the major CIOs are dealing with shadow IT problems because at home, you get to build your OpenClaw, you get to build stuff with Cloud Code. You're like, this is fun. And then you go to work and it's like, you're in the Flintstones, right? Like, oh my God, I have to type every line of code. This is insane. Why do I want to do this? And so if you as a company are not providing people with kind of delightful AI experiences, you will end up with a huge shadow IT problem. But there's not enough vendors who are making it easy to provide those delightful experiences in a way that's controlled in which you can build trust. And I think that's going to be a real opening for all the non-security companies as well going forward.
Yes, definitely. So I feel like that's a lot of like really great takeaways in terms of what we should be focused on. Like the apocalypse is coming. You should be reviewing and scanning all of the code that you're writing. We need to enable autonomous defenders to actually help us and they need the capability, autonomy, and security to be able to do that. What else is on your mind in terms of forward looking for this year? What's exciting right now for you? I
mean, the exciting thing with AI coding and what, one things we're trying to enable with Corridor is also for the first time ever, we have the ability to refactor major parts of code to get rid of security flaws, right? So sometimes when you're a security consultant or a CISO, you look at a piece of code and you're like, there's just no way to bug fix our way out of this. We should totally rewrite it. And that used to be completely impractical for almost everything. And now, like if you've got millions of lines of C++, turning that into Rust, which used to maybe cost you $10 million, is now tens of thousands of dollars, perhaps, right? Of at least tokens. And then depending on how much autonomy you're able to give these things, not a ton of time for your developers to oversee it. That is incredibly powerful. That now companies can make that decision. And I think that is something that's exciting me over the next couple of years as the software factory model becomes adapted and the agents are able to run longer term on these long projects, that we're able to find ways that companies can massively uplift their security by completely replacing or refactoring their code to get rid of entire classes of issues.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for taking the time to come out today.
Yeah, thanks, Allie.
In the middle of RSA.
Yeah, no, happy to do it. Yeah.
And then if people want to connect with you or Corridor, where can they find you?
Our website's corridor.dev. You can email me, alex@corridor.dev, if you want, or find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.